Hello, I'm Perrin Beatty, President and CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and welcome to the Business of Business. John Stackhouse is a nationally best-selling author and one of Canada's leading voices on innovation and economic disruption. He's a senior vice president in the office of the CEO at the Royal Bank of Canada, leading the organization's research and thought leadership on economic, technological, and social change. He has a remarkable CV. Previously, he was editor-in-chief of the Globe and Mail and editor of the Report on Business. He's a senior fellow at the C.D. Howe Institute and the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy, and he sits on the boards of Queen's University, the Aga Khan Foundation of Canada, and the Literary Review of Canada. John, welcome to the Business of Business.
Great to see you, Perrin, even if it has to be virtually. Thanks for having me.
John, you've taken some enormous steps here in terms of thought leadership. And just very recently, you released a report that was entitled The $2 Trillion Transition. It deals with the challenges of climate change for Canada, but also the opportunities. Can you perhaps give us a summary of what you covered in that report and what you see as the options available?
Well, we all know the challenges of climate change. We're living it and seeing it every day. We know the economic consequences as well as the environmental shocks that we're seeing. What we don't appreciate, Perrin, enough as a country is the opportunity that climate change presents to invest in revitalizing all parts of our economy, rewiring the economy quite literally in ways that can make us more competitive, more productive, and can channel a lot of the savings that are built up and providing a bit of a drag actually on long-term growth. So when we looked at the country's net zero commitment, we wanted to look at it through an economic lens and see what's this going to cost, number one, but how much capital is it going to require? Because too many Canadians, I fear, see this as a cost benefit. Or see this through a cost-benefit analysis and don't see it as an investment opportunity. What are the investments that we're going to need in new technologies, new processes to get our emissions down? And where's the best payoff for that? That's the sort of business thinking that we need to bring to the net zero conversation, and hope this report, the $2 trillion transition, helps Canadians see it that way.
The figure is staggering of $2 trillion. It's impossible for most of us to get our minds around that. But I was also struck in the release that you put out where you summarized the document, where you said this: as the world's 10th largest emitter, Canada must play a leading role in this global transition. Our current commitment of cutting emissions by 40% by the end of the decade means that we will need to eliminate 290 million tons of emissions. That's more than what all buildings, cars, trucks, and airplanes currently produce in a year. That's a pretty daunting challenge. Is it something that's achievable?
It's achievable if we get going in a very strategic way and get all of Canada behind this. We have to understand very clearly that the journey to net zero requires all sectors of the economy to transition, all regions of the country, all communities, in ways that actually are going to make them more economically competitive, more productive, and more sustainable. This is not about the oil and gas sector on its own. It's not about the transportation sector on its own. It's about real estate, agriculture, the way we design communities, and on and on. So we need to take that holistic approach to the economy and the country, and understand that we need to invest in every sector and every region, looking for those productive returns in terms of emissions gains, but also economic gains in their fullest. Is it achievable? Yes. It's $2 trillion is a very big number, more than any of us can count to in our lifetimes, or many lifetimes. But if you break it down, which we do in the report, it's $60 to $80 billion a year, also a big number, but that's about 2% of GDP over a quarter century, and that's very manageable. And it's especially manageable if you see it as investment. This isn't about tax and spend. It's largely about harnessing the savings of the country, be they in our pension funds or in our savings accounts or on corporate balance sheets. and getting those savings into productive investments and generating assets out of them. So in a way, this becomes almost a wealth building and certainly a growth minded model that at the same time gets us to net zero.
So it's achievable. How are we doing so far?
Well, not very well. If you look at our record over 10, 20, and 30 years. So there's no one person, no one government to blame. I think we all bear responsibility that we have made commitments, largely commitments to ourselves and to our children, that we have fallen short of. And this is a good moment for us to take stock of that, to ask, okay, why did we, when we can achieve so much in so many other areas of life, why have we fallen short here? And one of the conclusions we've reached in our research and conversations at RBC is that we need to change our playbook. We cannot expect to get different results by doing the same thing, or maybe throwing more resources at the same thing. That generally doesn't work in business or in other walks of life. So let's pause and think of different playbooks that we can apply to these strategic challenges. And I stress strategic challenges because one of the approaches we take in the report is to try to break down the problem. Any good business leader, when they're looking at a problem that seems too big to bite off, breaks it down. And we've taken this challenge of 730 megatons and disaggregated it by sector and by pathway, looked at the cost as well as the investment needs in that particular sector or part of the economy that we can invest in over 10, 20, 30 years, and the gains that we would get both environmentally but also economically. So a kind of an ROI analysis. We think by breaking it down that way, we can focus our capital, public, private, and indigenous capital, on these particular pathways and be very kind of laser focused in a strategic way to working through the transport sector to get its emissions down, for instance, or the buildings aspect of the country to get emissions in that area down, and letting the private sector really innovate, develop, thrive in the way that private sectors have always done so well within the guardrails set by the public sector. That's to us a great and exciting opportunity for Canada.
But notwithstanding the size of the challenge, and you're saying that we have not done a great job to date in terms of meeting the challenge, you don't give up in despair. In fact, you set out in your report some of the opportunities that there are there for Canada and for Canadian business.
Yeah, this is an opportunity. We tend to think of climate as an apocalyptic recognition, and I don't for a minute downplay the consequences that are very real to Canadians as well as people around the world. But if we see this as an opportunity, I think we can activate change a lot more and can accelerate change. One of the things we look at in the report, Perrin, is consumer behavior. And often in Canadian policy conversations, it's a little over-indexed on the supply side. We think, how can we control emissions in a particular sector or maybe even across the economy? We regulate it, we tax it, we try to contain and control it. Yeah, some of that may be necessary, but the biggest driver of change in the world is always on the demand side. When citizens say, I want this instead of that, business knows how to respond. When voters say, I want this rather than that, governments know how to respond. So how do we use all that we know through behavioral economics and nudge, not just theory, but practice, to help motivate that kind of change, to create the demand change that will pull along the supply side? And again, that's where we see a great opportunity through technology. How do we excite Canadians about the investments they can make at the household level in the way they live, the way they travel, the way we all move around, the way we eat and produce things at the household level? To do that more efficiently, so we save and we create more, maybe with less, and to do it in a more sustainable manner. I think most Canadians will be very excited by that opportunity.
This is perhaps the most important challenge of our time. It's existential. And most Canadians accept, and certainly most business leaders accept, that climate change is real, It's a threat to us, not just in Canada, but to humanity around the world. And it's a threat that's growing with limited time to deal with it. Can we talk about the role of business? Is business the problem or is it the solution?
Business is absolutely a big part of the solution. And that is, I think, becoming increasingly evident to people around the world. One of the reasons that finance is front and center at the Glasgow Climate Conference is that, frankly, over 30 years, going back to the first Earth Summit at Rio, we have had a failure of the state. Governments have promised lots of things and have not been able to deliver on that. Now, we're all responsible for that. I'm not trying to point fingers, but I think there's a recognition that governments have limitations. That's not necessarily bad, but let's recognize that. We also have a bit of a market failure. If this was so easy an opportunity, people would point out, well, markets would have taken care of it. Yes, they're right. This isn't going to work purely through the market. So we need new approaches that harness public resources. We know how to do this as a country, but really take advantage of the dynamism of business, that take advantage of the capital that is much greater in the private sector than the public sector over time, that leverage that capital, leverage the brain power, that invest in researchers and entrepreneurs and in businesses big and small, to take chances, to take risks, to test technologies, to test new practices, whether it's farmers or food producers or construction companies, see what works and then scale it. That's what business does, and therefore business absolutely has to be part of a major part of the solution.
Let's talk about some of the opportunities for business. You referred earlier to an expenditure of between $60 billion to $80 billion a year over the next several years. Much of this is available, presumably, to Canadian business if we have products and services that meet that need. How should Canadian businesses be preparing to be able to fill that need?
They should be looking at and scoping the opportunity, no matter what sector you're in. Enormous opportunity in agriculture and food production. Lots of good Canadian companies well down that road, but more need to get down that road. Huge opportunities in buildings and in physical infrastructure. Huge opportunities in what are called the heavy emitter sectors, steel and cement, things that Canadians are good at. We've got a very clean electricity grid compared to much of the world, including many of our neighboring jurisdictions, that make us more competitive in this emerging kind of new climate-focused economy. So every business thinker and leader should be looking at the next quarter century as a different opportunity than the past quarter century, and see where their strategic opportunities are. You can produce more and more efficiently with new energy systems. You can be more competitive internationally as a result. You can attract more capital. We're seeing that in our business, that businesses that have thoughtful net zero strategies and are demonstrating their execution of those strategies are able to attract more capital, debt, and equity at more competitive rates than they would otherwise. I think that message is getting out there and is a really exciting message. So we're, nothing moves quite like the speed of business, and we're seeing businesses really start to move on the net zero road. Probably going to move faster than governments. That's just the way it is. And so another, I think, important realization for Canadians to accept that. Not as just a reality, but actually a benefit. And therefore, how do governments kind of get out of the way and let businesses move more quickly down those pathways to net zero?
If we're seeing a business opportunity here, so are others as well. And indeed, many other countries in Europe, for example, many businesses in the United States, many jurisdictions there and elsewhere have perhaps been ahead of us in terms of recognizing these opportunities. Are we simply too late for the party?
No, we're not too late at all, but we do have to stay awake at night worrying and wondering about what others are doing. Take an example like CCUS, carbon capture, utilization, and storage, something we're very good at as a country. In fact, really good at. But it is a global race. There are European, US, and Chinese firms that are doing things at a significant scale that we can't do on our own. There are Canadian companies doing more in the CCUS space in other jurisdictions, like the US, than they're doing here in Canada, because we can't kind of get on with it, especially on project decisions. That's appalling for us as a country, that we cannot support our innovators better than our neighbors. We're punishing ourselves economically, but punishing ourselves environmentally as well. So those are things we've got to figure out how to get around. Thus the need for a new playbook. But absolutely see this as a technological race against other countries, and one that we not only don't want to lose for obvious reasons, but we actually want to win, because that creates export opportunities. So think of those CCUS firms that can be exporting so much more from Canada if they've got a strong home market. Think of what we can do in hydrogen if we are being the hydrogen technology seller to the world. Think what we can do in agriculture with ag tech, which we're quite good at as a country, but need to be a world leader in. And we haven't been investing enough in ag tech across the country. We can use climate resources to do that, but also enable our farmers to create low emissions food that will be more competitive, draw a higher price in global markets. So lots of reasons for us to want to win this race, because the spin-offs to communities, to individuals, to every sector are pretty evident.
Let's talk priorities here. This clearly is a major challenge in front of us, but we have other major challenges as well. We're faced with the need to recover from the pandemic. We need to get back to growth. We have priorities such as childcare or healthcare, to mention just a few. Can we do all of this at the same time? And where does climate fit in alongside all of those priorities?
So it's a great question, Perrin, and one that governments, frankly, don't ask themselves enough. What are the handful of priorities that I can focus on in the next cycle? Every strong CEO, as you know, is able to do that. They know that the curse is for them or their teams taking on too much. And as strong leaders, they will narrow the choices and excel at those choices. Governments tend not to be as comfortable with that. And these are big things to take on, as you've mentioned. So yeah, we have to be selective. Climate, we'd argue, is, as you called it, an existential challenge to the country. It also brings with it an opportunity to help address some of those other concerns, which is why we would argue it should be significant, if not paramount, among the things that the country is taking on over the next quarter century, but we really have to scale up what we're doing in the next 5 years so that in the next 20 years after that become more effective. So what do we need to do, and what are the spin-offs? Well, as I've been arguing, there's tremendous economic spin-offs from this. This is a growth generator. If we're to pay down the enormous debts that we've taken on because of COVID, for understandable reasons, we need more economic growth. Investing in climate technologies, investing in these pathways is, in our view, a way to generate that growth in a sustainable way, because we can generate growth in an unsustainable way. That's going to deliver more revenue to help us pay down that debt. Inclusion and diversity are big priorities for the country, and economic inclusion is a significant challenge, particularly with respect to Indigenous peoples. We see that as being a central part of an economically focused climate strategy. When we talk about mobilizing capital for the transition, we talk about it as bringing together public, private, federal, provincial, and Indigenous capital to invest in non-political ways in these transition opportunities that not only will generate economic benefits, jobs, and income for Indigenous communities and Indigenous peoples, but gives them a leadership seat at the table. That's a really important part of reconciliation. This isn't about consulting, about checking a box. It is about sitting at our economic table and our climate table and saying there is many chairs for Indigenous peoples at that table as owners of these initiatives, and we'll benefit from that because the thinking, the creativity, the knowledge that they bring to whether it's carbon capture or land use practices and agriculture are something that again makes Canada different on the world stage and more competitive in all sorts of good ways.
And increasingly the capital they can bring to bear on it as well.
Absolutely. So the settlements that we're seeing and that we will continue to see are helping to generate capital for Indigenous peoples in very significant ways, and hopefully ultimately just ways that we all need to be mindful of, come with opportunities for investment to ensure that that capital continues to grow for future generations in a sustainable way.
John, you've been leading the efforts in terms of thought leadership by RBC now for some time in a number of different areas. One of the areas that you've focused on previously is the whole question of skills and how we meet the demand that we're going to see for the future in Canada. To what extent does the issue of skills come together with the issue of dealing with climate change?
Perrin, I'm so glad you've asked that, because that is probably the biggest missing ingredient in the Canadian climate formula, or certainly the conversation. We often talk about capital, so we've got the $2 trillion transition. We talk about technology, electric vehicles, for instance, or carbon capture technologies, and we talk about consumption. How do we manage our behavior? We don't talk enough and we don't focus enough on the skills that are going to be needed quite significantly for the transition. These skills range from data, when you look at regenerative agriculture and the ability of Canadian farmers to capture carbon in the soil. That's going to require tools literally in the soil, but also data analytics that Canadian farmers actually will be pretty savvy with, but we're going to have to get into their hands and get the skills into their hands to manage. We're going to need all sorts of skilled labor and trades to literally manage the transition. This ranges from EV maintenance folks to the pipe fitters who will build carbon capture systems, to building retrofitters, construction workers who are going to be working with buildings in all sorts of new ways, working with new building technology in new ways. Some of this is just adding skills to the skills that are already out there. So we've got to use the systems, the community colleges, and the programs that we've developed in this country in a kind of 4.0 way to ensure that these kind of climate skills, I might call them, are available to the pipe fitters and plumbers out there. But we also have to reach into a new generation and say to school students, high school students, and post-secondary students across the country, you can have an incredible career in the 2020s, 30s, and 40s that's helping to solve the challenge of our times, which is climate change, in the most technologically exciting way possible. You can do that as a data scientist. You can do that through artificial intelligence. You can do that through electrical engineering. You can do it through design skills and community leadership. But all these areas and many, many more are going to require new skills. So we require a bit of a rethink of our curriculum, but also an enthusiasm to say to this generation, we want to help train you or help you develop the skills that you need, get you the tools you need, and you take us to that place so that in 2050, we're going to reach net zero together. But you're the ones who are going to be kind of ringing the bell at 2050 for us.
It's often said that we live in a time of constant disruption that requires you to constantly reinvent your business and to look at new products and services to offer. One of the greatest strategic challenges for business people is to know when to jump on to the merry-go-round. In terms of the decision of committing to providing new technologies, committing to making this green transition that you're talking about, are businesses better to make the move now or to wait until there's greater maturity in the technology and until the path forward is more clear than it may be today?
Such a good question, Perrin. We need to always remind ourselves that a lot of money has been lost through clean tech over the cycles, and it hasn't been just venture money or investment money. It's been businesses and owners and entrepreneurs who have thought something would transform their business and didn't. I like to say that first movers are first movers. It's kind of in your DNA, and you probably don't even think about it. You're just there first because that's the way you're wired. The culture of your organization is wired that way, and you'll get there. That's fine. They're kind of the frontier folks, the risk lovers, the second movers, so to speak. Nothing wrong with that. In fact, business case history is full of arguments to be the second mover, to be a fast follower in any range of sectors. And Canadians are often that second mover or that adopter of technology that is advanced elsewhere. That's okay as long as you're a fast follower, because generations of technology are accelerating. What's not a good option, certainly in my view, in the climate transition is to be a slow follower, to be that kind of wait and see person who says, maybe a decade out, I'll be able to adopt the technology or buy the technology from my competitor. We see over and over again in this 4.0 economy, and it's a physical economy as well as digital economy, that the pace of change is so rapid that if you wait for a competitor to prove something and then to buy it from them or copy it from them, they're going to be on to next things, but exponentially increasing their share of the market that will kind of permanently leave you behind with whatever residual you can catch. So I think that's a dangerous place to be, looking out into the 2030s.
And if you wait too long, instead of being an opportunity, it can become cost-free.
Absolutely. One of our challenges as a country, Perrin, is we're sometimes not the best risk takers. And here's where we need to blend public and private capital in creative ways that are responsible, that don't bring that moral hazard with them, where the public is taking all the risk and the private sector is getting all the reward. That generally doesn't work over time. But how do we recognize that a lot of these new technologies are risky? They can be big industrial technologies like carbon capture. They can be consumer technologies like electric vehicles. And sometimes the public does need to bear some of that risk in the early part of the risk curve. That's a way for a complete society or communities to more rapidly adopt technologies, and then let the private sector and the household take on more of the risk quite ambitiously as you move ahead in time. Different models that we've used in this country over generations. So this isn't a new mousetrap necessarily, but something I think Canadians need to be more comfortable with as we look at and hope to be more ambitious on the climate front.
One last question. COP26 is coming at us very quickly. What's your anticipation for that conference? What are you hoping for, and what role should Canada play? And for our viewers, what should they be watching for coming into this conference?
This is an incredible opportunity for Canada to lean into the world with pride, with conviction, to say we are and can continue to be a leader in the transition. And we are going to do that as a resource-based and resourceful, export-oriented country and global leader in all sorts of in all sorts of areas. We've got a lot to improve on, absolutely, as does pretty much every other country I'm familiar with, and we're working on that, and we should be held to account for that. But that should not cause us to shy away from our leadership as a thoughtful, inclusive, tech-savvy middle power in this world that can be a climate leader, using the resources that we have. We have the best bounty of natural resources in the world. Every Canadian knows this. We have the best mix of energy sources in the world, and we have the capabilities, whether it is oil and gas, or hydro, or nuclear, or wind and solar. I put up our team against any in the world. How do we allow that team to work with those resources with accountability to reduce their net emissions to get us all towards net zero? That's our commitment as a country, and we should be willing to say to the world, it's game on for us. We're well into that, but we're going to use the resources that we have. We're going to use the brains that we have. We're going to attract talent from around the world because that's what Canada is good at, and we're going to develop the ideas, the technologies, and become a bit of a demonstration case for the world of how you manage a thoughtful, inclusive transition over a 25-year period. We also have to bear in mind the world is pretty divided, as you well know, Perrin, and let's not be naive about that. The tensions now between the US and China, as well as between other regions of the world, are significant, and Canada is at risk of being caught between those tensions. We've seen that. But we as a country have also, through generations, been a valued and valuable bridge builder in the world. And here's an opportunity for us to get back to that as a country that's small in numbers population-wise, but big in ambition in what we can do for the world. How do we connect countries and peoples who may not be quite in sync with each other right now, particularly on climate? Because as the cliche goes, the world has only one climate, so we've all got to be in this together.
John, thank you so much. We've covered a lot of territory in the course of half an hour, but we simply scratched the surface, and it's a discussion that is going to continue for many years yet to come. Your report, the $2 trillion transition, is available on RBC's website. It's a very accessible and readable report. It's one that I recommend strongly to all of our viewers, and it's one which raises critical questions for Canadians and points out tremendous opportunities for us. Thank you for the leadership you've provided on this issue, and thank you for joining us today.
Well, Perrin, thank you for your leadership and for the Chamber's leadership on this issue and so much more. We need it more than ever.
Our pleasure. See you soon.